Welcome to our web exclusive. I'm Mike Montecalvo, along with Eyewitness News analyst Lieutenant General Reginald Centracchio. The latest developments now on the violent protests going on in Afghanistan this week, especially today. Now, the president of Afghanistan is appealing for calm and continued protests over the burning of some Muslim holy books in the U.S. military base. Before we get to the Quran, General, let's talk a little bit about what they're chanting in that country right now. And it seems like many different groups are chanting "Death to America."
Death to America and "Go home, foreigners." Those are the two slogans that are being put out there. But fortunately, it's not really replicative of the rest of the country as to how they feel. It's that group that is so radical that they don't interpret the burning of the books as anything but intentional.
Well, President Karzai said they do have the right to protest, but protest peacefully, and this is not what's exactly happening here.
Exactly. So I think if it continues to expand, we're looking at a pretty significant thing. We already have lockdown on the embassy as well as the base itself and all the other bases throughout Afghanistan. That in itself would suggest to me that not only we have to fight the Taliban and all of the other things that are going on, but the insurgents from within also. And you know, it's also we need to look at the investigation as it comes out as to who actually did it, whether it was an accident. I'm sure it's not intentional, but nevertheless, it happened.
All right, this is what we're hearing on Wednesday. The U.S., by the way, has apologized for the burning of the copies of the Quran. Now, they had been pulled apparently from shelves out of a detention facility because, according to the U.S., apparently detainees had put extremist messages in the inscriptions in the book, and that's what they were concerned about. Another story we're hearing is it was a mistake. They thought it was part of the garbage, and that's how it got tossed out.
Yeah, I think you'll probably see a combination of each of those. Once the investigation's done, however, it'll be a matter of someone did something that they weren't supposed to do before it got cleared. Others, perhaps there was some inscription on the books themselves, and maybe that led them to destroy them. Bottom line is how it's being looked at by those who are protesting. The Quran was destroyed, and that's all they want to hear. They don't care how it happened. There's no justification for it, and we need to deal with that.
How does it look across the world, not just in Afghanistan, that something like this happened?
You know, certainly it'll give us another area to be concerned about. We've had this happen in the past. It takes a time to get through it, but at the same time, I think we understand no matter what we do, if it involves the Quran, it'll be interpreted as being intentional, and we need to obviously do the best we can to get on the other side of it.
Well, General, obviously we have a deal on the table right now that would keep troops in Afghanistan to train them, especially this is a special mission, to train them for nighttime missions, and it's several thousand soldiers that are supposed to stay there over the next several years. They're now tabling that proposal because of what has happened here. Are we going to see a lot of this?
I think you'll see a short time when perhaps they pull back on some of the projected programs they have, such as night training. That requires them to be out in the country and out in the field and out in the hills. When you have lockdown, you pull all these troops in because not only are you the target of the insurgents there, but now you're the target of the individuals that want to have these demonstrations and cause violence.
What do you want to hear out of the White House at this point?
Well, the White House needs to continually demonstrate that we are investigating it. It was certainly not intentional. We already extended our apologies, and beyond that, there's nothing more we can actually do.
Do you step up security now for Al-Qaeda or the Taliban?
Well, you know, we're looking at who's involved in this now. We're seeing that some of the movement from Iraq into Syria, and we'll probably see some additional movement from Syria back into Afghanistan, reinforcing the Taliban. So what was once a pure Taliban deal we had to look at, now I think you're looking at the composite between many of the other terrorist organizations that are coming in to take advantage and leveraging this particular bad time.
Well, speaking of Syria, 60 people were killed on Wednesday alone as the assaults continue. 2 journalists were killed, one a French journalist, another an American journalist. They worked for a British newspaper. So are we getting closer now to pushing Syria into a full-scale war when you see something like this?
Okay, certainly, you know, we get closer and closer to a full-scale civil war. We're not there yet, but it certainly has the ingredients. The problem is that the insurgents don't have the kind of weapon systems that the government has. And if you looked at the last several days, many of the much of the violence and many of the deaths were caused by the actual artillery, as an example, of the Syrian government versus the rebels who don't have that kind of firepower. And that's why recently McCain suggested we should start to arm the individuals that are looking for a change within Syria. I'm not sure if that's the right thing to do or not. You get into another Egypt, you get into another Afghanistan, another Iraq, and certainly when you put more weapons into the hands of the rebels within Syria, you're asking for another possible explosion.
Now, with the two journalists killed, especially one being an American, and the president talking about severe sanctions for Syria, do you see it now being taken another step at this point?
Yes, I think you need to look at what those sanctions are going to accomplish. The ones that are presently being targeted for Iran seem to be picking up some momentum and seem to have some effect because it's affecting their financial wellness and their ability to transact. If the same thing could be done with Syria, it will have some traction. I think it would be good to be able to cause the Syrian regime to come to the table and try. But at the same time, he's already said we're not going to do that with the rebels because he thinks Assad feels as though there's too much Western interference or that they caused it to begin with.
Well, food and water is dangerously low now in many of the Syrian cities, including Damascus. Now, if they're not going to die from gunfire, they're saying they're going to die from hunger, and that's the real thing that they're looking at.
That's correct, and I think if anything the United Nations should be doing was be airdropping materials such as water and food stuff into the area. I would not suggest, and I don't want to see another Mogadishu where we have Black Hawk Down, where we went into the area with a humanitarian mission and it turned violent, and all of a sudden you're into a military confrontation.
Well, Russia is one of Assad's final allies, and so is Iran now that we're looking at. And he still wants some type of peace talks to continue. Are we past that at this point?
I think we're past that. Assad has said that pretty plainly. Assad feels that much of the violence has been caused by Western influence, and to sit down with that element of the country would be suggesting that he's saying, okay, Western, come in here and we'll deal with you.
Well, we talked about Russia. The other one being Iran. They had a couple of their ships parked in Syria's port. Another two warships went through the Suez Canal. With all this talk about Iran not letting the United Nations look at their nuclear facilities, nuclear weapons, and now we're seeing them, dock two ships in Syria. What do you see playing out at this point?
There's a potential for a real significant exchange of military action. We've already seen that Iran cut off the oil supply to basically Europe. That means that the next step would be to block the Strait of Hormuz. If that happens, you will definitely see a military confrontation. So Syria, as well as Iran, certainly are positioning themselves to possibly take on the whatever military units are in that particular strait.
No talks there too between the nuclear talks between Iran and anybody else?
I don't think so. I think what they're doing is trying to suggest that their nuclear program is pure for power only. But as we saw over the last several days, the inspectors that did go in said that 20% is but this far from weapons grade uranium. So a decision has got to be made. I think, looking at this whole possibility, that we will probably see Israel do a preemptive strike on those sites over the next several months. I don't see any other option.
And finally, I know I've asked you this question, it seems like every week, because we have not heard any of the candidates talk about this. But now, because of what has happened today, do you think the Republican candidates now are going to have to address what's happening in the Middle East?
I think they will have to do that. The questions, and I'm surprised that the people who are running these debates and running the questioning don't specifically target and ask them point blank, what is your position? What would you do? How are you going to get the confrontation with Iran to come to a conclusion, if there is a conclusion to be had? How do we deal with Syria? They're not answering those questions. It's general more than any specific action that they would take.
All right.
They're going to have to do that pretty soon.
General Centracchio, thank you for your thoughts.
Good to be here.
Thanks for watching.